Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event titled Freedom of Opinion and Expression and Academic Freedom. My name is Anna Rold. I'm the CEO and publisher of Diplomatic Courier. And today's event is organized by the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, the Permanent Mission of Finland to the United Nations, the Permanent Mission of the State of Qatar to the United Nations, Open Society Foundation's education program, and Scholars at Risk. Thank you again. Before we begin, I wanted to give a little context to our meeting today. On October 23rd, the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly will consider the report on academic freedom presented by the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. The report focuses on the ways in which freedom of opinion and expression protect and promote academic freedom and the special role played by academics and academic institutions in democratic society when assured of institutional autonomy and self-governance. We have several distinguished guests here today that will discuss the report's findings and recommendations and how they can be used to ensure freedom of opinion and expression as well as academic freedom. We will also discuss challenges and how the report might help us to address these challenges. So without any further delay, I'm now honored to introduce our first speaker, Her Excellency Sheikha Aliyah Ahmed bin Saif Al-Thani, the permanent representative of Qatar to the United Nations, who will give opening remarks. Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Of course, I'm delighted to be here and to co-sponsor the event. It's such an important activity to be held, and of course, it's a great honor and pleasure to have with us Mrs. Irene Khan, the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the rights to freedom of opinion and expression, who was, of course, appointed as by the United Nations in July 2020. Ms. Irene Khan, of course, a good friend of mine, is the first woman to hold this position since the establishment of the mandate in 1993, as you all know. Mrs. Khan was, of course, the Secretary General of Amnesty International from 2001 to 2009. And of course, she headed the International Development Law Organization, IDEA Law, from 2012 to 2019. I would like to congratulate you, Irene, again on this appointment. We very much look forward, of course, to working with you, and we affirm, of course, our commitment to fully support your mandate. I'm very delighted, of course, to co-sponsor this event, which presents an opportunity to discuss the report on academic freedom to be presented by Ms. Irene Khan to the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly on Friday. So the report, of course, highlights the relationship between academic freedom and freedom of expression and focuses on the ways in which the freedom of opinion and expression protect and promote academic freedoms. And most importantly, it highlights that academic institutions have a special role to play in society and, of course, as the place to educate future leaders, thinkers, the business sector, and of course, among others. As stated in the report, restrictions to academic freedom limit the sharing of information and knowledge, thus undermining the right to freedom of opinion and expression, including the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds. Today's event, of course, includes a distinguished panel of speakers, and I'm extremely proud that a prominent institution from Qatar is among the panelists. Of course, the Education Above All Foundation, represented today by Dr. Maleiha Malik, the Executive Director of the Protection of Education in Insecurity and in Conflict. A key program, of course, of EAA is of course, an important contribution that we are very proud of in Qatar. Dr. Mark will, of course, will shed light on the important work of EAA is undertaking to ensure the right of education for children and youth, and of course, to quality and sustainable education, and to prevent attacks on education. I will stop here, and I very much look forward to this very timely panel. Thank you again, Anna, and please good luck with the moderation of the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much. I'm now pleased to introduce Professor David Kaye, former Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right of freedom of opinion and expression, who will give a presentation of the main findings and recommendations of the report.
Thank you to the sponsors of this event, and a special thank you to Irene Khan, the Special Rapporteur, for her energetic and thoughtful start to the mandate. I would also like to thank especially those in civil society who provided input to the report on academic freedom, and in particular to Robert Quinn and Scholars at Risk for their assistance throughout the process of this report's research, though I hasten to add that all errors, of course, are mine. The report focuses on the freedom of opinion and expression aspects of academic freedom. Here I want to emphasize that I address mainly one set of protections for academic freedom while recognizing and reaffirming others. That is, this report emphasizes Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, but I pay attention as well to the rights in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and elsewhere. The report highlights the special role played by academics and academic institutions in democratic society. In these brief remarks, please allow me to provide an overview of the legal framework applicable to academic freedom and highlight a few key issues of relevance and in need of attention and development. First, what is academic freedom? Academic freedom, the report argues, should be understood to include the freedom of individuals as members of academic communities or in their own pursuits to conduct activities involving the discovery and transmission of information and ideas, and to do so with the full protection of human rights law. The discovery and transmission of knowledge and ideas and arguments are fundamental to democratic society, and academic communities and their members enable space for the full development of individuals and societies. They should be nurtured, protected, and promoted as a matter of central concern for all in government, civil society, the private sector, and across the UN system. Institutional autonomy is a fundamental aspect of academic freedom. Unfortunately, despite the importance of higher education to fundamental social and political and educational values, governments often interfere with the autonomy of academic institutions. They may require that institutions preclude the teaching of some subjects or require the teaching of others on non-academic grounds. They may impose standards on hiring and tenure, or they may engage directly in the hiring of institutional leadership that may be inconsistent with academic criteria and reflect political control rather than the advancement of learning. All of those tools and others undermine the ability of academic institutions to protect the academic freedom of its community members and to serve its broader functions in society. Autonomy, however, does not mean lawlessness or lack of oversight. To the contrary, institutional self-governance involves transparent but self-regulatory standards by which the institutions themselves, based on non-discriminatory and academic criteria, determine curricular, scholarly, and research needs and requirements. Standards concerning publication and hiring should be adopted and implemented by those with professional and academic expertise, rather than external regulation by administrators, or certainly not politicians. Teaching personnel must be guaranteed a say in the management, and decision-making of their institutions for the fulfillment of academic freedom. Now, let me say a few words about the freedom of opinion and expression as found in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 19.1 protects the freedom of opinion absolutely, permitting no restriction, whereas Article 19 protects in a robust way the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers and through any media. Article 19.2 on expression may be subject to certain narrow limitations, though those typically will be very hard to satisfy in the academic context. Certain aspects of research and pedagogy are closer to opinion than expression. For instance, a scholar conducting research may collect data and carry out analytical work with respect to those data, evaluate the data, and then articulate an interpretation in the form perhaps of a paper for distribution, sharing with colleagues, and ultimately publication. That analytic work depends upon the right to seek and receive information as a component of expression. And that process must be protected with its limitations subject to narrow restrictions. However, even before the stage of imparting information or seeking and receiving it, the scholar's work product should be protected from interference as an opinion, subject to no restriction of any kind. Practically speaking, that means that scholarly work product, as an opinion, should itself be protected from exposure, with demands for its transfer, for instance, to law enforcement authorities, subject to strict rule of law and due process standards consistent with international human rights law. It also means that scholars should not be subject to interference, such as intimidation and harassment. It further requires that scholars should have access to the kinds of tools that protect their work product, such as encryption or guarantees of anonymity in the digital realm. The breadth of the definition in Article 19.2 of the Covenant must be highlighted, just as the Human Rights Committee noted that expression involves every form of idea and opinion capable of transmission to others, including teaching. The right embraces even expression that may be regarded as deeply offensive. Now, academic communities also transcend borders, resulting in global scholarly conferences, meetings, publications, and other interactions. The global aspect of scholarly sharing is embodied in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which guarantees everyone's right to enjoy the benefits of science and embraces the encouragement and development of international contacts and cooperation in the scientific and cultural fields. Article 19.2 of the ICCPR recognizes that freedom of expression extends regardless of frontiers, which complements and reinforces the rights covered in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. On the one hand, this means that those in academic fields enjoy the right to seek and receive the work of others, whatever their field, and to impart their own work beyond national borders. Further promotion of academic freedom at the global level can be found in Article 12 of the ICCPR, which guarantees freedom of movement and the right of everyone to leave their country. Bans on both leaving and entering the country may amount to a violation not only of Article 12, but also the panoply of rights under the rubric of academic freedom. Individuals also enjoy academic freedom not only within their institutions, but also extramurally in their role as educators and commentators outside the institution. For instance, an academic bringing the expertise to bear in a hearing before a legislature, a lecture to a community, a conversation on broadcast media, or a post on social media should be understood as, among other things, an exercise of academic freedom. And even beyond that, when an academic engages in expression outside of her or his academic topic, she or he retains the right to freedom of expression guaranteed by human rights law, and that they certainly should not be targeted because of their status as an academic. Now, I want to conclude here by noting that restrictions on research or other activities related to public health, particularly at the time of COVID, must be demonstrated to be necessary for the purposes of safeguarding public health, and they must be non-discriminatory. Restrictions on research relating, for instance, to reproductive health should be strongly disfavored and strictly scrutinized to ensure that they are not related to gender-based discrimination or political positions not derived from academic freedom, academic criteria. I recognize that I've taken much of your time, so I will close here, and by doing so, encourage individuals and organizations to articulate their claims, including when addressing them to special procedures and other UN human rights mechanisms and treaty bodies, as violations not only of civil and political rights or economic, social, and cultural rights, but violations of academic freedom per se. Thank you very much.
Sincere thanks to Professor Kaye for that presentation. I am now pleased to introduce to you Irene Khan, our Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, who will also give some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Anna. Let me start by thanking Ambassador Al-Thani for opening this webinar, and to thank her and also Qatar, the government of Qatar, for its commitment to education and for their personal support to me in this and other capacities. I'm very grateful that you were able to find the time, Ambassador Al-Thani, because at the end of the day, what we as special rapporteurs do, the value, the impact of it depends on how governments receive our reports and how governments accept our recommendations. So I look forward to working closely with you to see how we can promote the findings of this report among the member states of the UN. I took up this mandate on the 1st of August 2020, and I want to thank, of course, Professor David Kaye, my predecessor, for his support during the transition of the mandate. And one key component of that transition is that this report was written by him in July and is to be presented by me tomorrow to the third committee. And David has brought to this report not only his experience of the past 6 years as this mandate holder, but also his passion and commitment to academic freedom. He himself, as a scholar, is a scholar, and so it's very fitting that his last report should be about something that is so close to his own experience. And I also want to thank those who helped contribute to that report, Risk in particular, that also organized the consultation and that led to many contributions, and of course to the many contributions of others. And I hope that the interest of open society will help us to take forward some of the recommendations. Now let me start this presentation, my presentation, with what David ended with, and that is that the human rights is very broad, strong, clear, encompasses a wide range of rights to meet the specific nature of academic freedom. But the question is, what is the reality on the ground? And here, as in so many other areas of human rights, there is a gap between law and compliance. And if any of us had any doubts about the risks that academics, teachers, scholars face on a daily basis, even in countries where academic freedom is protected, we only have to think back just 1 week. A week ago, a French school teacher was murdered in a most gruesome manner while walking home, and he was killed for showing 2 cartoons of the Holy Prophet Muhammad to his class in a discussion on freedom of expression. This tragic incident highlights not only the clash between religious sentiment and free speech, but also the risks that academics face every day around the world as they push the boundaries of thought, knowledge, and discourse. Academic freedom by its very nature is critical, inquiring, challenging, and so at times can be very controversial on campus and off campus. And the stature of being an academic, of being a scholar, of being a teacher is such that the views are given particular significance by society on all sides, and so can attract positive attention as well as negative attention. And the negative impact, of course, sometimes is felt not only on individuals, but also on the institutions where they work, on the academic community as a whole. And that is why it is so important for us to focus on academic freedom at this moment in time, when a number of factors come together, and I will focus on them because I want to focus on the reality of the challenges on the ground, in contrast to the principles of human rights that David put forward in his presentation. And the reality is that censorship kills scholarship. As David mentioned, freedom of expression is not absolute. The right to freedom of expression actually allows restrictions. And the challenge is to ensure that those restrictions follow the guidance and the guidelines of international law, which are that they should be restrictive, strictly applied, narrowly defined. But in practice, of course, that does not happen. Legality, which is the first point of the restriction. National laws are very often too broad, too vague, and can be used to restrict academic freedom, to detain, to prosecute academics, to intervene in the running of academic institutions. And sometimes the law does not even have to be applied or even adopted. The very thought of the law, the very discussion of the law can have a chilling effect on in many countries. The limitations, the reasons for the law, the lawful purpose is sometimes ignored, and instead of looking to follow the lawful objective set out in Article 19 that David described just a few minutes ago, they are sometimes used for political objectives, for ideological reasons. The curriculum can be politicized to promote official viewpoints or to censor criticism of government policies and positions. Labeling of certain topics as being against public morals means that certain issues cannot be studied without drawing adverse attention. Then there can be retaliation against those who have different viewpoints. There is sometimes in many places, although universities are public institutions with autonomy and self-governance, there is intervention from the authorities in the selection, appointment, dismissal of scholars, which of course undermines the autonomy. Students can be expelled for protest. There can be discriminatory treatment. Certain groups, religious and ethnic groups, may be denied higher education. And this is also very true of women and girls in many countries. There is discrimination in their own access, both as students, but also as scholars. In some countries, certain types of subjects, certain issues are criminalized, and scholars who are working in the area can be prosecuted. And then, of course, there is, of course, physical attacks, detention, even the death penalty for scholars in certain countries. And so what we see is, of course, excessive interference. We see censorship, we see surveillance, monitoring of speech and movement. Now, this is a difficult terrain, but this terrain of academic freedom has been made even more difficult in recent times by three issues. First, the challenges posed by teaching online reduces the opportunities that physical space, physical interaction in our real world offers for debate, for discussion. Access online can be limited or cut off. Sometimes connectivity is not available by design. Sometimes it is because of lack of resources. And disruption in education may mean that many students, especially girls, adolescent girls, may never be able to complete their education. And travel restrictions that COVID-19 has brought has also reduced the possibility for scholars to interact with each other. that is the first issue, COVID-19. Then alongside COVID-19, we have seen in recent months and weeks a rise in protests and political activism around the world. And scholars and students are actively participating in these protests. Historically, campus protests are the harbingers of change in many countries of the world, a central point for democratic activity. And therefore, these kinds of student activism, scholarly activism, is, of course, becomes then a point of suppression, of repression. We also see the forces of non-state actors, retrogressive forces, violent extremism that seeks to determine what we will study, what scholars that question what this research of scholars, the questions that scholars raise, the points that they raise, the methodologies that they bring to public policy. And the stature that academics have, of course, draws attention to them, negative attention in many cases. So just when we need academic freedom, whether for scientific knowledge, whether to find an effective response to COVID-19, or for political discourse to strengthen democracy, pressures on academic freedom are growing. So the question is, what are we going to do about that? We need to recognize first and foremost that academic freedom is a very important pillar of democratic society. It is a very important strategy for advancing sustainable development. It enables, without academic freedom, societies lose one of the most essential elements of the capacity for self-reflection, the capacity for generating knowledge, the capacity to search constantly on how to improve the lives of people. And I think that is what we need to promote academic freedom from that perspective, the value of academic freedom. All of us need to do that. And in the context of that promotion, we then need to address the key stakeholders on how to take forward the human rights, strengthen the human rights that underpin academic freedom. And the report has some important recommendations. First, for governments to acknowledge the value and importance of academic freedom in terms of advancing sustainable development and in terms of advancing democratic freedoms. And recognizing that value, to bring laws into line, to refrain from coercion. Sometimes the coercion can even be financial. It can not necessarily only retaliation. Sometimes the coercion takes form of undermining institutional autonomy. But all of that actually backfires in terms of the progress that governments expect to see in their societies, in their economies. The second set of recommendations is addressed to international organizations, to the United Nations itself, to its treaty bodies, to the Human Rights Council, to consider academic freedom when they are looking at human rights compliance. For example, in the Universal Periodic Review, to check how countries are performing on sustaining and strengthening academic freedom. Third set of recommendations are to the academic institutions themselves. As autonomous institutions, they need to live up to their role and their responsibilities of appropriate self-governance. They need to also protect from coercion members of their academic community, their teachers, their scholars, their students. And fourth and finally, the recommendations address the rights holders, the scholars, the members of the academic community themselves and their representatives and civil society organizations, and ask them to frame their claims in terms of academic freedom, not simply as a human right or a collection of human rights, but as a collective right to academic freedom, as an individual right to academic freedom. And this promotion and this understanding of academic freedom as a value that we must preserve and nurture, I think would be probably the biggest contribution in the follow-up of this report. Now, this report and the collaboration that I hope it will open up with stakeholders, with governments, with the international organizations, with civil society, is of course the beginning of a journey. This is an issue that has not been dealt very at depth by this particular mandate. So I hope that there will be a lot of discussion on it and that we can take it forward. I think we are at a very interesting moment where the human rights aspirations and the development aspirations have come together in the context of the agenda for sustainable development. That agenda, of course, itself is under a challenging, in a challenging situation right now, given the state of the world, but it is also a moment for opportunity to see how we can integrate the human rights aspects, how can we integrate academic freedom as a driving force for governments, for peoples, for societies everywhere to advance those goals, both the human rights goals as well as the development goals. So I'm going to stop here, and I hope to listen to the panelists and then come back in my closing remarks on ways in which we can take forward some of the recommendations of this report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Khan. I really appreciate your part of the presentation. I also want to thank again Ambassador Al-Thani, who will have to leave shortly. At this juncture, at this part of the meeting, I would like to steer us a bit into the future and look into how the report's recommendations might help us mainstream academic freedom within the UN and globally. And before I introduce the next couple of speakers, I wanted to remind everyone joining us today that there's a Q&A option, and I see some folks have already started adding their comments there and questions, and we welcome them and we'll address them as soon as we can during this part of the discussion. So it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Camilla Croso, who is the director of the education program of Open Society Foundations, and ask her to offer her thoughts on the role of academic freedom and its importance in advancing open and democratic societies.
Good afternoon, good morning to all that are accompanying this panel. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to the State of Qatar, to the State of Finland, to the Office of the Special Rapporteur for hosting this event, to Scholars at Risk for joining me in this panel, and to you, Anna, moderating it. I would like to start by expressing our deepest appreciation for the initiative and the efforts of David to put in place this fundamental report on academic freedom. At the Open Society Foundations, we think that this is really a groundbreaking moment because it really lays out very clearly in great detail how the problematics and offers recommendations to move forward and gives us all, let's say, a roadmap to really work on and ensure that we can make progress. We think that the report is also being launched at an extremely timely moment in a context where we observe attacks on academic freedom increasingly grow, with students and teachers increasingly being criminalized. And of course, as Irene, we would like to pay tribute to the French teacher, Samuel Paty, who was brutally murdered. It really does give us a photograph of the times that we are living and the urgency of this report. This is also a context of COVID-19, and what we are seeing is that even in the midst of such a complex context of COVID, where we have seen so many multiple crises just deepen before our eyes, interlinked, even in this context, we see growing movements of anti-science and anti-intellectualism, including regarding anti-vaccine discourses and just science being challenged and under total attack. We think it's very important that academic freedom is acknowledged and protected in international human rights conventions that the previous Special Rapporteur David laid out so clearly in his initial remarks, referring also to the General Comment 13 of the Committee of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the UNESCO recommendation concerning the status of higher education teaching personnel, and Article 19 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. I want to underline that for Open Society Foundations, the importance of academic freedom to democratic society is extremely broad. It pertains to the society as a whole. It pertains to the production of knowledge and to the advancement of thinking, of freedom, and of the fulfillment of human rights way beyond the academic scenario. Open and democratic societies cannot endure without schools and universities where knowledge is open, shared, and debated in the spirit of free inquiry and integrity, respect for diversity, values, and rights. And likewise, education institutions are unable to fulfill their social role without the guarantee of academic freedom and autonomy. We also wanted to highlight that academic freedom is also of crucial importance to the student community, as its infringements impact on their right to quality education, to open and diverse society. And we also want to point that some countries have actually been openly incentivizing students to expose and tell on teachers that discuss issues that suffer censorship, thus instrumentalizing them to infringe on academic freedom. And we think that this is a particular issue that deserves our attention, the way that students are being incentivized to infringe on human rights. Academic freedom, of course, is an enabler and integral part of other rights, the rights to education, broader freedom of opinion and expression, but also the right to the benefits of science and human progress. I wanted to just highlight very quickly three examples where we are seeing very problematic drawbacks in terms of academic freedom. Brazil, where I am from, I am Brazilian, is a country that clearly is on the rise in terms of attack to academic freedom. A report written as part of the Global Public Policy Institute's project on academic freedom, authored by the Center for the Analysis of Liberty and Authoritarianism, just recently launched, shows that threats to academic freedom in the country include significant budget cuts and freezes, judicial orders censoring political debates on campuses, reporting channels for political and ideological complaints, new laws and interpretations affecting institutional governance, and false statements about the academic community and scholarship as a whole. There is an enormous movement, let's say, that grew under the recent years called Schools Without Parties, that affect both basic and higher education, that is actually inhibiting or censoring issues such as gender equality. Even the word gender currently in Brazil is being challenged. Any kind of the word, even literary gender, is erased from legislation. So it's really something quite incredible, really, to see taking place. There is also growing interference of federal government in the selection of rectors of federal universities. Another example relates to Hungary. In April 2017, Hungary signed amendments to Hungary's national higher education legislation, restricting academic freedom for CEU and other universities and forcing the university to actually move out of the country, starting in Vienna, its 2020-2021 academic year. But actually on October the 6th of 2020, in a case that was brought forward by the European Commission, the European Court of Justice ruled that with this legislation, Hungary has breached WTO law, EU law, and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. This was, of course, a landmark decision that strengthens legal protections for institutions and is an important victory also for academic freedom in Europe. And lastly, I would like to refer to the situation happening in Ghana, a country that has long been considered as having strong tradition of academic freedom in its universities, and academic freedom is protected actually under the country's constitution. But recently, in the spring of this year, the government proposed a public university bill which puts academic freedom in Ghana under threat, giving the president power to appoint chancellors of all public universities, dissolve university councils in emergency, limit union representation on council, and interfere with the admission process. And I would like to highlight and also thank the Special Rapporteur Irene Khan that co-signed a letter with the Special Rapporteur Ms. Wally Berry of the Right to Education, having sent a letter inquiring on the scenario and strongly recommending that Ghana can continue to be a champion of academic freedom. So I will stop for the moment and I look forward to further debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camilla. And it's my pleasure to now introduce to you Dr. Maleiha Malik. She's the Executive Director of Protection of Education and Insecurity and Conflict at the Education Above All Foundation. Dr. Malik.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be able to speak today and to support both Ms. Khan's mandate and also to mark the publication of this important original work about academic freedom. Education Above All Foundation has 4 programs. I steer the program which is called Protect Education, Insecurity and Conflict. We were the founding members of something called the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. And a noteworthy aspect of that coalition and the definition of an attack on education is that, as well as other ways of attacking education, such as, for example, physical use of threats against teachers or force against a school building, we include attacks on education, academic freedom, as part of an attack on education. And the reason we do that is linked to the reasons that Ms. Khan made clear, which are that we believe that there is a golden seamless thread that runs through our understanding of how knowledge is made and then knowledge is transmitted. So those who claim that somehow a commitment to transfer of knowledge at the primary or secondary level can be done without also safeguarding academic freedom, I think, make a really central mistake. In any society, academic freedom, the freedom to be able to think and to be able to ask difficult critical questions, is also linked to creating the general culture that allows the development of a strong primary and secondary education sector. And this is particularly important in conflict-affected zones, which are the areas that my program Peace works in, and where education is most under attack. Because in these countries, what we know when we look at the data is that there's a cycle of violence, a cycle of conflict and insecurity, where attacks on education are part of a wider conflict and a wider crisis that's taking place in society. And one other aspect of that now, as we've been discussing, is that COVID will make the recovery of those societies back to positions of post-conflict recovery even more difficult. What the societies therefore need more than anything else is imaginative, critical thought that emerges from their own communities to rebuild these societies in a way that creates good citizens. It creates not just passive learners, but critical thinkers who will make a contribution to their own communities. And therefore, for all these reasons, based on the mandate of the program that I'm committed to, Peace, I welcome Ms. Khan's commitment to defending freedom of academic expression. And I am particularly committed and would ask her to give an equal priority to those very difficult cases, conflict-affected communities, where academics are facing exponential pressures and threats to creating indigenous, critical, free thinking in those societies. I congratulate the authors on the publication of this report, and I reconfirm the commitment of my foundation and my program, Protect Education, Insecurity and Conflict, to standing with Ms. Khan and to stand by all those who defend academic freedom, particularly in these difficult conflict-affected situations, so that we come out of COVID stronger than before. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malik. And it's my pleasure to now introduce to you Mr. Robert Quinn, the founding Executive Director of Scholars at Risk Network, and ask him to describe the current legal challenges and responses to pressures on academic freedom around the world. And I realize that we're very tight on time, so I'm going to do my best to field the questions that we're getting on the Q&A, but if you can make them as concise as possible, that would be great. Robert.
Thank you, Anna, and my thanks to the session organizers, to all the state representatives who have taken part or are attending, to Special Rapporteur Kaye for his report, to Special Rapporteur Khan for taking up the issue, and to all of you for sharing your time with us. I really want to emphasize at the beginning that the report, I think, is especially important for the very simple fact that it states with great clarity that academic freedom is protected by existing human rights standards, period. The fact that it is protected by the existing standards is in and of itself an important fact. And I really hope that on the presentation of the report tomorrow that the UN bodies appropriately may take up that fact and reaffirm by adopting the report, perhaps with resolutions or other actions. Within that very simple statement, I also want to flag that the rapporteur's report really makes a number of very important contributions to understanding that within a universal understanding of academic freedom, there are certain points that often get neglected. The biggest, of course, is that academic freedom is not just a subset of free expression. And we've heard other panelists discuss right to education and benefits of science and travel, anti-discrimination, and so forth. Also in there is that it includes extramural expression. When academics do their responsibility to society by going out and sharing their expertise with society, they are being academics, and that expression is protected. It includes academic travel, as we've heard, and as Camilla mentioned, many states do have issues with restricting academic travel. It includes the rights of students, especially organized student expression, and that is one of the areas where we see a great deal of attacks on the university space. It includes gender-based violence and other forms of discrimination that impair the exercise of academic freedom by a number of communities. It includes the institutional autonomy, the institutional academic freedom that's necessary for institutions to be able to protect academic freedom, which goes to quality of teaching and research, but also so that they can serve society and the public good. And that really is at the core of all of this. Academic freedom is first and foremost about quality research and teaching and discourse. And we need that so that the higher education sector can do its best to serve society and the broadest public good. Now that we have this wonderful report and this firm statement affirming all of that, it's incumbent on all of us, on states, on civil society actors, on the higher education sector to carry this report into action. And the question is, how do we do this? How do we apply it, as Irene said, to the facts on the ground? And I will say outright, the facts on the ground in many places are not good. Scholars at Risk Monitoring Project, which monitors attacks on higher education, produces our annual Free to Think report documenting attacks. And since 2012, we've documented over 1,700 attacks on higher education in more than 100 countries. So this is not an issue limited to any one region, to any one set of countries. This is a constant tension between power and those who produce ideas and those who ask questions. On November 19th, we will release this year's report, the 2020 report, with a webinar. That report will document over 300 attacks in the last year alone. And we know that these are only the tip of the iceberg. This is only a sample of the attacks that have happened in the last year. Within these attacks, what do we see? We see legislation eroding institutional autonomy, as has already been mentioned about the legislation in Ghana. And again, I'd like to thank the Special Rapporteur, not only for her letter, but for cooperating with the Rapporteur on right to education. Those types of cooperations, I think, are exactly what we need to see going forward. And of course, also in Turkey, where numerous decrees have been used by the government to erode institutional autonomy. We see threats of mergers or closures of institutions aimed primarily at reducing diversity and support for minority or diversity communities within a country. We see policies targeting specific subject matter, such as gender studies, which we've seen in countries such as Poland and Romania, and as Camilla said, in Brazil and in Hungary. As well as more broadly on entire areas such as the humanities or social sciences. We see, of course, arrests, detentions, and expulsions of faculty and students. In Turkey, in recent years, over 7,000 were dismissed and over 900 were detained or arrested. In Belarus right now, at least 177 students have been detained since September 1st, merely for their peaceful expression. We see threatened or actual reductions in budgets or restrictions on licenses, such as with CEU in Hungary, as Camilla said, and also in Russia with the European University of St. Petersburg, and again in Hungary with the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. We see the restrictions on travel that I mentioned, and also we see vague and overbroad laws which directly erode academic freedom. These may be laws such as lèse-majesté, defamation, treason, sedition, insulting the state, and so forth, including, for example, the recently new national security law in China that threatens to fully destroy academic freedom in Hong Kong. And because it includes language which is extraterritorial, which applies to anyone, anywhere, whether they've ever been to Hong Kong or will go to Hong Kong, it threatens to erode academic freedom everywhere. All of these types of pressures are picked up in our Free to Think report. They're also picked up in the new Academic Freedom Index, on which Scholars at Risk is very pleased to partner with the Friedrich Alexander University, the GPPI in Berlin, and the Wiedem Institute. First released last spring, the index provides state-level evaluations of the protection for academic freedom over time. And because it provides it over time, it gives us a tool to build on David's report and to encourage and assist with forming policies which strengthen academic freedom and to challenge policies which we see undermine academic freedom. And finally, I'd mentioned that Scholars at Risk is also working to address what was mentioned earlier, the very real challenge of the chilling effect that all of these laws and policies have on the much wider community of scholars. And we're pleased to partner with Al-Thani Media on a new survey of academic self-censorship in the Middle East region. And that will be released in early November, and we look forward to being able to report back and begin to expose that invisible side of this problem. So by combining data streams, which is what all of this is about, by combining incident reporting and country level assessments such as the index and perception and self-reporting at the individual and institutional level, what we're trying to do is provide data about the facts on the ground so we can support states and civil society and higher education in doing what the Special Rapporteur recommended in his report, which is to bring claims that specifically reference academic freedom and its importance to everyone in society, to use the existing mechanisms. And Scholars at Risk stands ready to assist and partner with states and civil society and higher education as best we can on such things. But I have to conclude by saying most important is we need states to lead the way. We need states, of course, not to threaten academic freedom. That's a given. But what we really need is well-behaving states that respect human rights, that respect the role of higher education, international, cross-border, free flow of information, to publicly and fully declare their support for academic freedom and for this important report, to commit to holding those who threaten scholars and students and universities accountable, to partner with civil society and higher education sector to develop new norms and practices. This event, this report is a wonderful place to start, but it is a long road. It is a journey, has been said. I thank all of you for being here for this first step in this journey, and we look forward to taking it with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. So we have a few interesting comments and questions. And, since we're only 4 minutes before the end of our webinar, I wanted to then maybe go to the very first question that was asked that is very relevant, perhaps for Special Rapporteur Khan to maybe weave into her concluding remarks, and that is how this UN initiative will liaise with other regional initiatives on academic freedom, especially on the thorny but crucial issue of monitoring and sanctioning breaches of academic freedom. And this perhaps goes hand in hand with another question on what kind of interoperability will happen And we have obviously here states represented in this webinar, and the Special Rapporteur's office, and as well as civil society and organizations working on these issues. What kind of coordination is happening between all of these actors to make sure that the challenges are addressed properly, but there also there's efficiency in how these challenges are addressed? Shall we go ahead? Ms.
Yes, let me just take on the regional. This mandate actually cooperates with regional mandates on freedom of expression in the Americas region, the Inter-American mechanism, with Europe, with the OSCE, and with Africa. So, and that is, of course, in the context of freedom of expression. But we also cooperate with the Special Rapporteur on the right to education, as was mentioned on this case in Ghana. So there is cooperation there, but I think what we probably need to do here is to broaden that cooperation. I was very interested in seeing that question on European effort to define academic freedom and how we can broaden the support. From what Robert said so clearly, what this issue is about is constituency building. A multi-stakeholder constituency needs to be built. And it is precisely in that situation that one looks to collaborate and coordinate. So I'm very pleased to see that reference to the European effort that is taking place. Now, I should say, from the experience of freedom of expression mandate coordinating with other regional mandates, what really helps to bring us together is actually civil society. Some actors, civil society actors. One of the things that does not emerge from the report or from the depth of David's work is how little resources special rapporteurs have. We are effectively individuals with very little support from within the UN system because of pressure on resources. But we have the advantage of being independent experts, of building partnerships with others. So I would encourage one of the leading organizations on academic freedom from civil society to bring us together, bring the special rapporteurs and other initiatives together, perhaps on an annual basis or whatever seems practical, and let us review what has been laid down on the ground. And every year, let's push a little bit forward and make some progress.
Yes,
well, so if I may, certainly, of course, Irene, we would love to be a part of that. We think that your letter is a great example and this event is a great example. And I don't want to speak for Camilla, but I'm sure OSF would be want to be a part of that. I would flag for people that there's a great deal going on right now. In Europe, especially, there's a great deal going on, even within the state systems on academic freedom. The European research area just earlier this week put out a Bonn declaration on the freedom of scientific research. Tomorrow, the Council of Europe is voting on a recommendation on academic freedom that calls for more monitoring and study. The European higher education area and the Bologna Follow Group are also looking at establishing some form of a monitoring mechanism. So there is a lot of activity at the state, interstate level within Europe, but not just in Europe. We have for years worked with colleagues in Africa and West Africa in particular about trying to form partnerships around academic freedom. And I welcome people getting in touch with us so we can put you in touch with that group. In Latin America, there is a growing early stage academic freedom network, but I absolutely agree. This is about partnerships. It is about moving things forward. And I think now is an opportunity and a moment to capture.
Thank you, Robert. And Camilla, would you like to chime in as well?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to really use this last minute to underline that we as Open Society Foundations think it's really crucial that this is the beginning of a process that moves forward. We think it would be fantastic if a mechanism could be set up, either as Irene put forward or another mechanism to bring together member states from time to time to accompany these recommendations. But also, I just want to make very explicit our pledge and our absolute commitment to academic freedom as an education program, as Open Society Foundations. This is an integral part, a core dimension of our 4-year strategy and after, because it's absolutely at the essence of what open societies believe in terms of strength and democracy. So please do count on us, and we will do what we can to really forward and contribute, collaborate to this end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camilla. And we're a few minutes past the hour, and I wanted to see if any of the co-panelists would like to address one more question for just a very short minute and a half, maybe, before we conclude.
Well, if you'll forgive me, so I do thank you for the different comments, and I'll try to reply to them offline if I can, but otherwise feel free to email us and we'd be happy to continue that conversation. And as I said, on November 19th, we'll be holding a webinar, which is specifically looking at our Free to Think report, which will continue a lot of these same issues for anyone who is attending. But again, I really just would echo, and it addresses some of the questions that are in there. Yes, we need collaboration. We need it between states. We need it among the interstate actors, and we need it especially within the higher education sector itself. And we haven't really touched on it, but sometimes the threats are coming from within our own house. And so we need to also talk to each other as we do this. But again, today is a really important step. So thank you, everyone.
And I just want to thank all of our participants today for spending time with us, our Special Rapporteur, Irene Khan, and all the sponsors and the panelists today. I wanted to let everyone know that I want to flag the registration form, because that is a way that we can share more information with you via email. Please, as Robert said, feel free to connect, and we'll make sure that these questions are also addressed, and also other opportunities for collaboration. I want to thank everyone today for giving us your undivided attention, and wish everyone well and a great rest of the week. Thank you.